As China moves forward with its Belt and Road initiative, Portugal has expressed interest in joining on board. What opportunities are on the horizon as economic ties between the two countries strengthen? And China and Africa are boosting cooperation and cultural exchanges. How are China and Ghana promoting a stronger understanding between their industries and people? Welcome to The Point from Beijing. I'm Li Xin. China and Portugal have been in contact since the age of discovery, when Portuguese explorers and priests traveled to China along the ancient maritime Silk Road. Hundreds of years later, as China embarks upon its Belt and Road initiative, Portugal once again has expressed its interest in coming on board. Economic ties between the two sides are becoming increasingly close. Chinese companies have invested in Portuguese enterprises in recent years, including Energia de Portugal, an energy company, and Redes Energéticas Naciones, REN, the Portuguese National Energy Network Company. Some analysts have said Chinese investment has helped the government to reduce sovereign debt during the economic crisis, but others are concerned that the EU member is on the road to economic and political dependence on China. So are these concerns legitimate? How do Portuguese entrepreneurs currently perceive China-Portugal ties? To find out, Castro Henriques, Chairman and CEO of AICEP, Portuguese Trade and Investment Agency, are joining me in the studio for discussion. So, Mr. Henriques, thank you very much for joining us here in the studio. First of all, I understand you are here for talks in the automobile sector. Could you elaborate on the current state of cooperation between the two sides in the automobile sector? Where are we, and how important is the Chinese market for Portuguese automakers?
Well, first of all, hello, Chin. Thank you for inviting me to your show.
Welcome.
Well, we are starting to work. There's still a lot of work to do. We've been having contacts with the Chinese automakers for quite a while now, a couple of years, and we've been working to try to identify opportunities for both parts. We believe Portugal is extremely competitive at this moment. We have received significant investment in the automotive sector from France and Germany, so I think this shows the competitiveness of our country for that sector. And we also see Chinese companies improving immensely on their products and leapfrogging, in particular in the electric vehicle sector. So Portugal would like to be at the forefront of the partnership for that.
So what is your main message to Chinese automakers or investors in the auto industry? What do you want to say to them as the advantages of Portugal?
Well, very, very simply, I think with the amount of investment we've received from China, especially in the financial and energetic sector in these past few years, we can really show to other Chinese companies how successful this has been. So the first message is, look, other Chinese investors have invested in Portugal and it has been a success. The second point is, we've been receiving quite the biggest productive sector investing in Portugal has been the auto sector. This is the biggest sector the agency deals with. And this just shows the competitiveness of Portugal for that sector, whether it is in component production, in car manufacturing, in the IT sector for the car manufacturing industry, in R&D. Just to give you an idea, nowadays you have a significant amount of multimedia solutions within your car that have been conceptualized, developed and produced in Portugal for the European market. And so at this moment, we think we have a very competitive offer for Chinese automakers.
Well, Portugal, people would say, is a relatively small economy, right? The domestic demand is really very, very minimal compared to the gigantic scale of Chinese automakers. What kind of leverage does Portugal have to lure Chinese investors?
You're absolutely right. We have a very, very small country. Our population is actually less than the city of Beijing. Now, you can't look at Portugal from that perspective. Portugal is a full member of the EU, so our real internal market is the EU, so we're talking about 500 million consumers. But on top of that, Portugal has direct ties to the Portuguese-speaking countries around the world. So this means that we have another 280 million consumers that can be accessed directly from Portugal. So when you look at Portugal, you need to think of Portugal as a country where your destination is of 780 million people, rather than just 10 million people.
At this moment, that is very rosy picture, by the way, but at this moment we are looking at some very strong headwinds, I think needless to say, coming from the United States, very strong signals that trade should not be free, that people should not just put wherever they want to put their money in. Actually, very strong tariffs have been placed on a couple of sectors, and the auto industry is on the line, possibly the next to be taxed by President Trump. What does that mean for the auto business in Portugal, and is that going to be an opportunity, an obstacle?
Well, I think it still is a bit too early to speak on the consequences of any tariffs that still aren't out. However, if you break down the figures I gave you, I'm not really sure this will directly affect trade within the European Union or trade between Portugal, which is a European Union country, and Africa and South America. However, there is a very, very important factor for Portugal here. Portugal is a country that thrives on globalization. We're a small open economy, so we benefit from having as global a market as possible. And a new trend which goes against open markets, which goes against global trade, is actually not positive for Portugal. However, I think it really is too early to discuss consequences. I think at the end of the day, this might affect the productive capacity in certain regions, but above all, and I think this is the main message that the Chinese automakers need to understand at this moment, is, look, Portugal is an extremely competitive location for you in Europe. We're actually one of the best locations in the world according to the World Bank, and I think we need to work on this notoriety. Most of the meetings I've had with the automakers, well, they actually never thought of Portugal for that, and when I tell them, do you know actually what is the biggest sector investing in Portugal is the auto sector, they are quite surprised.
Speaking of Chinese investment, naturally we are touching on some very sensitive nerves here. China's investment to Portugal, by the way, exceeded 9 billion euros for 2017. That's about 10.5 billion US dollars. As I mentioned in the beginning of the show, mostly so far Chinese investors have been in the energy sector, and the stake have been relatively high, either 23% or 25%. And some people, as I again said, are worried of the kind of influence China might have on the independence of Portuguese economy or politics. Are you not afraid of that?
Not at all. And I'm actually glad that you asked this, because I see a lot of discussion sometimes on this. From a Portuguese perspective, we really don't see that in that way. Actually, we see the Chinese investors as very, very fruitful for Portugal. They invested in a period of serious crisis in Portugal, so they took a risk. They have been successful with that. We have strong industrial partnerships in all of those companies with the respective Chinese investors. So this is also an opportunity for expansion for the Portuguese companies. So we are very, very glad with Chinese investment.
On the other hand, we're talking about Portuguese investment in China compared to China's 10.5 billion US dollars. That number is really small. 2017, that's 210 million US dollars. What is Portuguese position on investment in China?
Well, I think the outlook is positive, but the first thing that you have to compare is the different sizes between countries, first of all. The second thing, and this is obviously relevant, we underwent a very, very serious crisis in 2011 to 2013. So obviously Portuguese companies are expanding more on an export basis rather than investing abroad, because some of them, and to be very, very truthful, are still licking their wounds from the crisis. Nevertheless, I think there will be growing investment from Portuguese companies in China. What we've seen at the agency is that the numbers of companies interested in China and doing first missions to understand the Chinese market has been increasing significantly. And we can't forget this. We, just like China, and just like I mentioned, we also have a very, very big internal market. So the first focus within the crisis was obviously to focus on the internal European market. I think China will be developing these exports gradually. On average, on a long-term trend, we've seen that these exports have grown on a yearly basis at around 8%, if you include also services. And I believe this trend will continue.
You're talking about a trend in investment or trade in goods? Okay.
But it is very, very important to understand that the type of investment that we're trying to bring now, I am sure that this diversification will also focus on doing further business with China.
Yeah.
So consequently, just like we did with the other investment from other European countries, this will increase significantly our trade with China too.
Let's talk a little bit about trade. Figures from China's customs show that bilateral trade between Portugal and China in 2017 exceeded $5.6 billion. Among that, very interestingly, Chinese exports dropped year on year by about 14%, whereas Chinese imports from Portugal increased by almost 35%. What do the ups and downs tell us?
Well, I think we need to look, and the agency does this. I mean, we did it with trend on a daily basis, so we actually look more at trends rather than specific years. On a specific year basis, we try to understand whether that event will be significant for the future.
What's the trend here then?
The trend has been a growth one, both, and now let me put this on from a Chinese perspective, both for Chinese exports but also for Portuguese imports. Chinese exports have grown in the past 5 years at a yearly rate of about 10%, and Portuguese imports have grown at about 8%.
You mean Portuguese exports to China? Or
yes, Portuguese exports towards China.
Also has been growing by 8%.
Everything has been growing. So
okay.
I think that the movements that we've seen in 2017 are for just that year. These are normal movements on a specific year basis because, you know, you obviously have companies that have orders that don't go through, some exports that actually don't go through even if they're ordered. And I think there's also a specific impact in 2017, which actually goes to the Portuguese exports regarding, well, towards China, which is our biggest export actually is cars nowadays. We export Volkswagens towards China. And in 2017 was actually a year where they changed their line of manufacturing. So it's normal that they reduce their exports, and as you can see in 2018 they're increasing immensely.
Okay.
But nothing significant. I only see good news, and I think the future this trend will keep up.
Do you foresee China's Belt and Road Initiative, as we continue to promote this initiative, bringing any further scope for bilateral trade and investment? I
do, at two levels. Prior to that, I think it's very, very important to understand, and I hope that our Portuguese viewers see this. The Belt and Road Initiative is of paramount importance for China. Now, if it is of paramount importance for China, it will definitely have a very, very big impact globally. Definitely, so from a Portuguese perspective, we need to see how we can embrace that. The first level will be, I think, there can be further cooperation even on the transports and routes that we have towards China, which will definitely increase trade. The second trend is, I think it will also broaden the perspective on investment from Chinese companies towards Portugal, but especially on a triangular basis between Portugal, Portuguese companies, Chinese companies, for instance, in African countries. And that will increase trade for both countries, probably in third-party countries.
Very interesting. Also, I think it is very important that people understand each other better on a people-to-people exchange level. Good news is that in 2017, 1.6 million Chinese visited Portugal. That's an increase of 41% year on year. What's behind that, and how significant is that for the Portuguese economy?
Well, I hope and I believe that the Chinese have discovered how nice the Portuguese can be, and how we are a country that has dealt for centuries with other countries. Let me give you a figure which I think is very, very relevant. Most of our youngsters speak at least 2 foreign languages. No one learns a foreign language unless he wants to deal with someone from a different country that speaks a different language. So we're a country which is culturally very, very open. We've dealt with China for hundreds of years with our relationship with Macau.
Yeah.
And so I think the Chinese have finally discovered that Portuguese people are very, very happy to have them visiting Portugal. We've also had a very, very big improvement, which was a direct flight from Beijing to Lisbon. So that helps a lot because it makes it easier. But above all, I think there's a discovery process going on.
Okay, great. I hope I'll be able to visit Portugal for the first time myself as well. Thank you very much.
I hope so too.
Thank you very much, Castro Henriques, Chairman and CEO of AICEP from Portugal.
Thank you very much, Xin.
And you have been watching The Point with me, Liu Xin. We're going to take a very short break, and when I come back, I'll be taking a look at how China and Ghana are boosting cooperation in the industrial sectors. Stay with me. And Ghana in Western Africa have enjoyed strong growth in economic relations. In 2017, bilateral trade amounted to $6.7 billion, ranking 6th out of all African countries that trade with China. Ghana's exports, in particular to China, also increased by 40% in 2017 compared with in 2016. So what do Ghanaian industry insiders see as opportunities in the near future in China? Earlier, I talked to Dr. Yaw Adu Gyamfi, president of the Association of Ghana Industries. I started by asking him the latest progress in the interaction between his association with its Chinese counterparts.
Association of Ghana Industries, which is basically we call the AGI, which is really the private voice of Ghana industrialization, has had some good relationship with China, People's Republic of China. That as part of it, last year, we were given an office under the Belt and Road initiative in Qingdao. So now AGI has an AGI liaison office in China that we are working directly in relationship with businessmen of China.
Yeah. How significant is that step for your association?
It is very significant. I mean, the AGI liaison office in Qingdao is very significant in the sense that it has given us opportunity for us to explore, to know those private sector businessmen in all those sectors that are interested in particularly cooperating or having collaboration with businesses in Ghana and as a matter of fact in Africa. And that office has really helped build that relationship, which is going very well.
What kind of business relationship has been forged, to your knowledge, between Chinese enterprises and Ghanaian enterprises? What kind of situation or volume of investment or bilateral cooperation are we looking at?
If you look at basically the imports and exports trade market, it has really significantly grown. In the sense that when you see we have got doctors coming from here to collaborate with doctors in Ghana. We have seen an increase in pharmaceuticals in the area. We've seen also a lot of prospects that China businessmen looking to see under the 23 sectors that we have, what they can do with the private sector in Ghana. So it's really great improvement that we see.
What kind of industries, what kind of interest do Chinese investors show for Ghanaian industries?
Most of the sectors that they are interested in is much more of construction and government contracts. And what we are really telling them that, look, it should go beyond that. Because governments come, government go, but particularly if you deal with the private sector, whereby you have actual partnership investment, that area we will grow, particularly when you look at agriculture. Ghana is a based country, that if you invest in agriculture, our land is very fertile, that anything you grow, we basically will make it. So we are now being able to look at other areas, other than just mining and construction, to see that there are other opportunities in all other areas that can be explored.
What do you think have been some obstacles facing Chinese investors when they're looking into areas? Is it the lack of understanding of the local laws, regulation? Is it the lack of local expertise? Is it lack of what could potentially prevent them from successfully investing in these sectors you mentioned?
I think Africa has been on the dark continent, as others know. Many people that they know about Africa is hunger and diseases. But things have changed. A lot of Ghanaian, China businessmen don't know Africa. They don't know what even goes on there. For example, I keep talking about it. When you talk about Africa, you are talking about a continent of 1.2 billion people, made up of 8 different economic blocks. When you look at Ghana, which is in the ECOWAS region, which is the West Africa Economic Bloc, made up of 15 countries, of a population of over 300 million people. If a Chinese company wants to know, what they need to find out is, what am I going into? What are the needs of the people in that area? What kind of collaboration do we need to do? For example, if a young man meets a woman, of course you try to find out all the details about that woman in order to have a relationship. What we are saying to Chinese businessmen is that you need to find out what Africa is about. Even though the resources are there, what are the kind of resources that are available? What are the exploration that you need to do? It's not just mining. There are more to it than mining. Whatever it took to build People's Republic of China, that's what it would take to build Africa. So as a continent made up of 54 countries, which a lot of Chinese businessmen don't even know that we are whole 54 countries, just like China is 33 different provinces. That's what you're dealing with, different languages. And therefore, the culture, the business environment must be studied. But this can be done only when you are able to have a good relationship with the business associations in those countries and understand them. And with that collaboration, knowledge is power. And when you get the knowledge of these places, then you can build on it and do a better investment.
From what you have observed in your interaction with Chinese businesses, do you think slowly Chinese businesses are understanding what you were talking about and starting to show interest, and you are helping them, you know, take them by their hands to find their partners? Very much so. I think from the past, like, we have seen that most Chinese were much more interested in only government businesses. And we are saying that it is the small, medium enterprises that build the economy of any nation. If you come to most African countries, you see that the actual economy is being supported by about 85 to 90% small, medium enterprises. And this is where we are saying that Chinese companies are now beginning to be enlightened that when we need to deal with the Chamber of Commerce, the industrial sector, the private sector of these countries in order to achieve our goal. Okay, we have talked to some Chinese businesses and we have tried to understand what they think. I think one of the things that they kind of find slightly to their disadvantage is the difference in size, in volume. Chinese businesses are very used to produce in mass amount, you know, that is the economy of scale is where their profit come from normally. But in terms of African businesses, especially small and medium-sized enterprises, very often you are looking at a much smaller scale of investment. For the Chinese businesses, it's difficult to calculate, to see the return in a very promising way. How do you help them you know, understand the situation and understand that this can be profitable to them? This is where I started talking about data. Chinese businessmen need to understand that you need to get the data. What kind of data you're talking? The data, I'm talking about statistics. For example, if you want to go into pharmaceuticals, what is the population? I'm looking at it. What kind of medicines are needed? And what are the numbers are we? For example, some of these countries in Africa import almost 90 to 100% of the medicines that they use in those countries. Even Ghana, we import about 70% of our drugs. So as a Chinese businessman in the pharmaceutical sector, you need to understand what are the medicines are used in that country. What is the, in terms of money that these people consume, purchase for medications. So data is the answer, and that data will also help you to make a decision whether do I invest or don't invest. We look at what are the kind of diseases that are in that area. So I believe that the bottom line, like you said, is all go back to numbers. What is the numbers? The economies of scale dictate the numbers. When you want to invest in Ghana, I'm telling you, do not think about Ghana. Think about West Africa. Think about the whole economic bloc made up of 350 million people and not just 29 million people in Ghana. Ghana will become your base. But because there is what we call economic protocol covering all the 15 countries, it means you can supply whatever you produce in Ghana, export it to all the other 15 countries. Now Africa has gone beyond that. As of past March, African presidents met, head of states met in Ethiopia, Kigali, and passed a whole new resolution, coming what we call Continental Free Trade Agreement. What this means that now Africa has become one market. Whatever is being produced in any of these countries can be exported to any of the countries in Africa. So you are talking about 1.2 billion markets. If China is 1.4 billion, then I'm saying that you are talking any company ready to go to Africa and be situated in Ghana is talking about 1.2 billion African market that's available. Another thing is a lot of people are saying the government-to-government relationship between China and African countries is very good, but in terms of understanding among the people, especially the local media, for instance, their understanding of China's intention sometimes is not so positive. What is your comment on that? What can be done?
What can be done is exactly what you are doing with me today. We need to teach each other. We need to expose each other.
And
I was very happy
you.
that you gave me the opportunity to speak to the Chinese people and the people over the world. That look, Africa is now ready. The information flowing that Africa is not a place of hunger, but Africa is a place of economic transformation. If any businessman, I would take this opportunity to grab it, build and find out what can I do with associations of industries in those countries. For example, for us in Ghana, we have started something called Gangeria, which is associates manufacturers in Ghana in relation to manufacturers association in Nigeria. We are building bridges so that once we become one and coordinate and have counterparts in China, there's a lot we can do together. So together with all hands on the deck, we are about to make great continent of Africa become great so far as economy is concerned.
Absolutely. I think the opportunity is highly recognized in China as
Absolutely.
well. Africa has its 2063 agenda. Ghana has its own development strategy, and China has its Belt and Road. China has the China Dream. China is working very hard towards that. What do you think Africans have to do as well in order to catch these opportunities, to dovetail national strategy, or to, I don't know, to understand the Chinese mentality as well, maybe?
It's always been my dream, and I think we have come to realize that some of us, like we were schooled outside, but we came home to build Africa. It's been something that we have now been echoed everywhere, that Chinese people build People's Republic of China, Americans build America, Europeans build Europe. We are not expecting anybody but Africans to build Africa. And therefore, for Africa to achieve this transformation, all the Africans in the diaspora who have studied in all different sectors, it's time for them to come home and let's help build Africa. In doing that, we are not only just encouraging our people in the diaspora to come, we are building relationship with our people, our friends outside. Like we talked about, we have over 6,000 Africans, Ghanaians, just Ghanaians studying in China.
Right.
What are we doing? We are building relationships so far as culture, technology transfer, and the know-how. And when these people finish school and they come back, not only they bring knowledge and technology transfer, they are bringing the China culture. And also going to help Chinese companies that are willing to come to Ghana to develop their business in terms of partnership, to work in these places. So the work culture and an attitudinal change will come. As you hear, under our President Nana Addo Akufo-Addo's initiative, building Ghana beyond aid. We do not want to beg anymore. Rather, we want to build partnership for creating a new Ghana, a new Africa, that all Africans can live and enjoy, so that our next generation of the youth of Africa can come and enjoy. And that's what we are all looking to see.
Okay. Thank you very much,
You're
Dr.
very
Gyamfi.
welcome. Thank you very much.
And that's all for this edition of The Point with me, Liu Shin. As always, follow me on Facebook and Twitter using the handle The Point with LX. Download the application called CGTN to watch the show on your mobile devices, or go to YouTube and look for CGTN The Point. Thanks for watching. You've got The Point.